In this episode, we met with Pat Shekel, EVP of Product Management and Marketing for Singlewire Software, to discuss the critical role alert notifications play in today's business landscape.
Today, many customers are coming to us looking for emergency notification. That's usually the tip of the spear.
Yep.
And those use cases are active shooter, severe weather alerting, any sort of escalation of a situation that is workplace violence. In healthcare, there's just an astonishing amount of violence against caregivers. Medical assistants, nurses, et cetera, are assaulted at just really high rates. And so the hospitals are giving people the ability to hit a button on a phone or hit a hardwired button or a function key sequence on a laptop and call for help. And that might not be something that goes everywhere. It might not be truly mass notifications targeted, but that sort of thing we see a lot. But the whole idea, active shooter is a big one, or just, intruder alert, workplace violence, where they just have the idea that I want to get a hold of everybody very quickly.
When I first thought about this conversation around Singlewire, it was like, if I'm in a classroom or I'm in an office where the shooter or the catastrophe is happening right there in that environment, that's what we're talking about. But it's also the people that potentially are going to enter it. Now, what do you find device-wise? What's the most useful? So when you're issuing alert, obviously, if you're sounding the alarm across a company, you're using audio broadcast tools like speakers and things along those lines.
Yeah. So what we found is we really started by sending to desk phone handsets, not calling them, but broadcasting to them. There's a big difference. For one, technically trying to call phones doesn't work very well because the phone system will see it as a denial of service attack. And just from a use case, from a customer experience standpoint, if the phone is ringing, you have to pick it up, right? Which a lot of people don't do, right? So if you can broadcast that phone, basically turn that phone into an emergency notification speaker, it's going to be very effective. So what we do that's somewhat different than what most people do is not only do we send to the mobile phone, which everybody does, but we send to all these on-premises devices. And we do it not just with text messages, but we do it with audio, which is very intrusive, it grabs your attention, right? You think about just, the fire alarms that have been in buildings for 50 years, it's all audio, right?
Yeah.
It grabs your attention. Now they've added lights and things like that, but it starts with audio is intrusive, it's going to grab your attention. So the desk phone is really where we started. We go to existing overhead speakers, which is very common. Use that, give new intelligence to that device. You think about like a campus facility. If you have, say, 15 buildings on that campus, in a traditional overhead paging scenario, you are sending to each one of those systems individually. We send to all of them at once. So if there's an issue happening at building A and you want, the next 10 buildings to know about it because they're in the vicinity, we can light up all of those systems at once.
Oh, wow.
So, sending to the phones, sending to overhead speakers, if they're existing analog. We also have 10 manufacturers that send to IP speakers. So these are power over Ethernet IP speakers that plug in. And we have the ability to control what's happening there. So control the volume. Many times we'll have a display and we can scroll text. So that adds that functionality. Think about like in a gymnasium, you can read that from across there. So it might be very loud. Or in a manufacturing facility, it might be somewhat unintelligible, even at 120 decibels, because people have ear protection on, and yet they can see what's happening because it's scrolling text and it's flashing LEDs to draw the eyes to the scene.
The amount of touch points that you need to make sure that an emergency notification is retained or even gets to all of the individuals, 100% of the individuals on your campus and your facility, the sky's really the limit. I don't think that there is too many. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's just like, it's no different than any other message that you're trying to put in the target audience head, right? It has to be 10 to 12 times in order for it to really sink in. I think the troubling thing that they're trying to solve or are solving is if you don't get a marketing message, you just miss out on an offer. You don't get one of these messages and it could be a real bad day for you.
Yeah.
And so I think the urgency of having the ability to get the messages to places of convenience where people are is, it has to happen. Now, what's the biggest issue that you find when you're when you're deploying an alert, I remember in the mobile devices at times they say you got to be careful because you don't want to clog the network where you can't get the message across. Are there other things, other to-dos that you need to follow in order to make sure that you effectively deliver a message?
Yeah. So when we talk about effective notifications, it starts with speed and reach. So how quickly can you get it out there?
Yeah.
And how close to 100% of your desired population can you reach? And there's been a lot of studies that have shown, published in the Journal of Homeland Security and other places, that have shown that sending only to mobile devices is only going to reach about 80% of your desired population. And the reason that is because you have people that have them turned off or on silent, in bags, briefcases. You have parts of the buildings that are poor cell coverage areas. And then you have people to which you owe a duty of care that you don't even have their numbers. Like right now, I don't have your phone number, and
Right.
you wouldn't get an alert from us. So having an in-building alert helps reach that 20% of the people that you might not otherwise reach. And then there's a whole series of best practices around how do I want to reach people. Part of it is good testing, right? So making sure the reachability is there, using it for non-emergency use cases to ensure that the system is working. That you're reaching the people that you want to reach, and that they understand that you're the authority that's putting that out there. One of the other things that we found is that adding additional methods of communication helps increase the legitimacy of the message. And therefore the likelihood that people are going to take the right action, right? So you think about that, like I get a text alert, and I'm like, oh, is that real? I get
Exactly.
But if I get that text alert while the overhead speaker is going off, my computer desktop is popping up and playing audio out the speakers of my laptop, etc. They're like, oh, this is real. I better do something.
Oh, that's interesting. And that makes sense. It's almost like traditional marketing, right? If I don't reach the target audience at least 10 to 12 times, the chances of my message getting across to that consumer or whoever it is goes down drastically. I think the nice thing about Singlewire is they've been around for quite some time. So you need to make sure that not only can you get it out there, but that it's going to reach all of the devices that you want it to reach. I mean, I think that's the other nervousness that I always have with emergency alerting is I may be able to successfully launch the message, but if I do it in a way that isn't systematic, I potentially don't get it across to anybody because I jam the entire system. They have figured out how not to do that.
Right.
And the fact that they have been consistently delivering that across thousands of customers make them, I would say, the de facto choice if it was,
If it was me, I
Yeah.
was betting my life on it.
Right. Give me some ideas of casual communication that you use across your network. So you talk about setting this, becoming the standard for a trusted communication vehicle. What are some of the casual ways you do that?
Well, I mean, there's some really basic ones. Like we have a scheduling facility in there. So we have customers that use it for, in schools, they use it for their bell schedules. Because there's one guy in the county that knows how to work that mini fridge with the dip switches on it that schedules their bells. And so now they put it in software, and now it's, and that way it's reaching all the endpoints that you're expecting it to reach. So that's a common one. Another one is shift changes, breaks, safety warnings for manufacturing. So some of the daily notifications.
Oh, interesting.
And in healthcare, you see things like workforce notifications, like you need an extra half dozen nurses on Friday night, and you send it out to a pool of, say, 50 nurses offering that up, and they respond. And so that's a way to make sure like your message confirmation is working and so forth.
Yeah.
So it varies by industry, but it tends to be more of the daily non-emergency workforce notification type scenarios.
Oh, that's interesting.
Now, getting into one of, I think, your favorite topic from this conversation was the casual touches. So when there isn't an emergency going on, everyone thinks about this product as, it's there just in case. And what I loved about what Pat opened us up to was how you can leverage their product to keep casual touches, to keep that system not only for testing purposes to make sure that everything's operating properly, but also, build a cadence with the individuals in that facility so that they understand like that system is doing something, like the bell schedules, things like that.
Right. The system has got to be something that the audience has faith in, that it delivers communication that is not only consistent, but it's also accurate.
Right.
And so I think the casual touches make a ton of sense even just to make sure the system is working, but also to make sure that everyone is listening and figuring out, because I think audio communication is not so different than visual communication in the fact that the audiences that you have may be a little different than some of the other audiences that other folks have, and figuring out what sounds, what messages are resonating best with your audience will help you be most effective when that particular situation comes up that you need to get the message across. Having the time casually to test the bells or the break times or just the fun communications gives you an insight into the audience that you wouldn't have if you just used it during the emergency.
Yeah, and even insight into how effective some of those communications are.
So you look at using broadcast communication devices, obviously like digital signage, you
Yeah.
use IP telephony and mobile. Are there any other devices that you are finding to be interesting? Are you like illumination of lighting or anything along those lines?
Yeah, we've seen a little bit of that. People turning lights different colors. So a green if things are good. Especially now with the LEDs and the different colors that they can light up.
Right.
So green if things are good. Lighting pathways for people for exit, and that exit or that action may change depending on what the use case is, depending on the scenario. So some things are shelter in place, some are exit now.
Yes.
Or building evacuation, and so they will do different things. So yeah, lighting is more prominent. The desktop client seems to be more of a common denominator, and digital signage we see proliferating. We really do. A lot of people already have digital signage, or they're looking at it and they're doing different things with it. They're doing wayfinding with it. Say, here's your exit path.
Right.
Or here's where you want to go. If it's a tornado, you're not exiting. It's like here's your safe place. So yeah, digital signage is increasingly more prominent, and I think it's one of those things that it's another signal, but you can also convey a lot of message. It's a big space, right? So there's a lot of real estate on a digital sign, and people are moving. So while you may be thinking, well, let's send it to the desktop, and you want to do that too. But if you're moving through a hallway or a common area, a digital sign is a great piece of visual real estate to grab someone's attention.
Yeah, it reminds me of you talking about even just that casual communication that you're doing with, whether it's the bell between classes or break time in a manufacturing facility. Having that habit forming, it makes a lot of sense. And I think the nice thing about for us with signage is, I always say it gives us an opportunity to communicate when someone's in a more vulnerable state. Because fighting with YouTube or Facebook or whatever else is on their mobile device gets to be tough at times.
Right.
But if I got them when they're coming out of the restroom or walking to the break room or walking into the building for the first time, I've got a little bit of opportunity to start to casually communicate with them, where they see it as a place of where they can get vital information that is pertinent to the facility that they're in.
Right. And just the concept that I'm cruising through a hallway, or I'm in a meeting room, or in some spaces, very large areas, gymnasiums, cafeterias, etc. Cutting through the clutter and wiping off the content that's there already and overlaying it with that emergency message. Again, going back to legitimacy.
Yeah.
Oh, this is real, and I'm seeing it there. I mean, that's a stamp of legitimacy that's probably going to get people to follow the prescribed action.
Mobile is such a critical component in everyone's life. It's a critical component in the solution and emergency notifications as a whole, but it can't be the only thing.
No, and I think especially where they most likely see the crowds of people, that's when I think users and consumers are in their most vulnerable state.
Right.
The fact that they're not holding their mobile device because they're holding a ton of books going to a class, or they're going to get a cup of coffee, or whatever the case may be. That's where you're gonna probably utilize some of these other devices a lot more than you would a mobile device. But at the end of the day, you've got to penetrate at least as much of 100% of that audience as you possibly can. So to the comment earlier, getting every device on this network would make sense, right? Just because this is not something that is a coupon. This is a life-saving communication.
Right.